All eyes on the nation's capital as abortion is back in the spotlight. The Supreme Court hearing oral arguments on banning abortions after 15 weeks. A government shutdown is looming again. Lawmakers have until midnight on Friday to finalize a stopgap measure, or funding will run out. And we sat down with Dr. Alfie Breland-Noble, founder of the Acoma Project, to learn ways to deal with seasonal depression and stress. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. The Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments today challenging Roe versus Wade. The case involves a Mississippi law that bans most abortions after 15 weeks. The justices are considering whether to uphold the ban, which could bring abortion bans to many more states. Chief Justice John Roberts, a key swing vote, seemed open to allowing states to ban abortions earlier in pregnancy while leaving some parts of Roe in place.
If you think that the issue is one of choice, that women should have a choice to terminate their pregnancy, that supposes that there is a point at which they've had the fair choice, opportunity to choice. And why would 15 weeks be an inappropriate line? So viability, it seems to me, doesn't have anything to do with choice. But if it really is an issue about choice, why is 15 weeks not enough time?
Mississippi passed a law in 2018 banning most abortions after 15 weeks. A U.S. district judge immediately struck down the law, calling it unconstitutional. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals later upheld the ruling. Now, Mississippi is appealing the case to the Supreme Court. Adam Carrington, a political science professor at Hillsdale College, says this is the biggest abortion case in a generation.
This is the first time where it seems like the court seems open to scaling back significantly or even overturning those cases again in a generation.
Attorney General Lynn Fitch asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade, writing that the conclusion that abortion is a constitutional right has no base in text, structure, history, or tradition. The Center for Reproductive Rights is representing the Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is the last abortion clinic in Mississippi, in this lawsuit. They argue that the law defies decades of Supreme Court precedent. The Supreme Court is also looking at a separate law in Texas that bans most abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. Carrington says if the Supreme Court were to uphold Roe v. Wade, it's unlikely that they'll take on another challenge to it in the near future.
This is hard to overestimate. This is truly a big, momentous decision, and a lot of the future of abortion debate, the pro-life movement, and everything that is attached to that is going to be hinging on what these justices do in this case.
Decisions on the two cases are not expected until well into next year. And now, staying in the nation's capital, a government shutdown is looming again. Lawmakers have until midnight on Friday to finalize a stopgap measure, or funding will run out. So far, congressional leaders have not been able to secure a deal, though they are hopeful one will be made before the deadline. Senator Mitch McConnell said on Tuesday that Republicans are working with Democrats to avoid a partial federal shutdown and keep the government funded past Friday night.
We won't shut down. I think we'll get there, and certainly nobody should be concerned about a government shutdown.
Lawmakers also facing a deadline on the debt limit, commonly called the debt ceiling. The Treasury Department projects it may run out of cash in 2 weeks. If lawmakers don't raise or suspend the borrowing limit, the United States could risk defaulting on its debt obligations for the first time. Democrats and Republicans disagree over how long a funding extension should last. All eyes on centrist Democrat Joe Manchin. When asked about Biden's spending bill, he once again raised concerns about inflation.
Inflation is now more than transitory. We found out it's not transitory, and on top of that, you have this new strain of COVID they're very much concerned about. No one knows what effect it's going to have, and you have inflation on top. So all these things give you cause to pause.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer hoping to bring Manchin on board soon.
We've had a good meeting with Senator Manchin today. We mainly talked about climate issues, and we're going to get this bill done with 50 Democrats before Christmas. That's our goal.
And President Biden also hoping it gets done soon.
The sooner the better.
When the Senate passes it, the House would still need to pass the altered bill. And Congress set this deadline earlier this year when both the House and Senate passed a bill to extend funding through December 3rd. And now, amid the uncertainty around the new variant and the closing of another year, we sat down with Dr. Alfie Breland-Noble, founder of the Acoma Project, to learn tips for battling seasonal depression and anxiety. Dr. Alfie, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So with confusion around the new variant, there seems to be an added stress, especially, say, for teens and young adults. Maybe education or career is up in the air right now. And as we head into the holiday season, there might be that pressure to keep up with a kind of image on social media. So what would be some tips to handling that pressure?
So I think a couple things. What I always like to share with people is that stress has two parts to it. One part is the stimulus, what's coming at us. The second part of it is how we respond to it. And I think what's really important is helping young people understand that even for them, teenagers and young adults, Gen Z and millennials, and Gen Alpha even, that stress is a real part of their lives as well. Because sometimes they think, well, I'm not old enough to be stressed. I don't have the problems my parents and caregivers have. Who am I to complain about stress? I also think about young people who come from immigrant populations or who have marginalized identities in terms of race, ethnicity. What are the messages that they receive, right? We made so many sacrifices to bring you here and to be here. How dare you complain sometimes? Or what do you have to be stressed about? You're just a kid. So what I'd like to tell young people is you have to acknowledge that stress is a real thing for you. That's the first piece. The second piece is you want to have some how-tos for how you manage it. So once you acknowledge it, then it's really important to start thinking through, well, what can I do about it? So exercise, meditation, journaling, talking to a trusted loved one, a trusted adult, or a trusted peer are all some ways that they can go about the how-tos of managing that stress once they acknowledge it's a real thing.
And so also in the holiday season, on the flip side, maybe some people aren't celebrating with anyone, or maybe they don't like the holidays and people keep telling them it should be the most wonderful time of the year. And there are a lot of reports of depression rates and even suicides going up. So for people who are in that boat or people who might know someone in that situation, what would be some tips for them?
I'd say that we have to always honor what we're feeling, right? What I tell people is I ask them to ensure that you're respecting the perspective that you bring, honor its uniqueness, honor its importance for you, and don't allow yourself to be dragged into and swept up in some of these other experiences that other people may be having. So one is, it is perfectly honorable and important for you to recognize and acknowledge how you're feeling in the moment without comparison. So some of the tips I shared earlier and strategies about how do you stop comparing yourself, I think it's important in this regard too. I think secondly, it's important to understand and recognize that we need connection. Right? And so while we might not celebrate a holiday, that's not our source of connection, there are other ways in which we can get that connection through other people. So pick up the phone, use your texting, use FaceTime or whatever kind of, Zoom or whatever it is to allow you to stay connected. I think sometimes what we have a tendency to do when we feel the sadness creeping in or we feel the anxiety creeping in is to withdraw. Because the withdrawal allows us to sort of be caught up in our own heads and in our own individual experience. And that's not the time to allow yourself to sink into that. I think the key is to really push yourself and force yourself to find that one person. Just one. You don't need a ton of them. You just need one person you can reach out to for that connection. And then finally, it's really important, as you raised the question, I'm really appreciative of it, is to recognize that this is the time of year. We talk about seasonal affective disorders, where clinically we know that it's a thing, right? Because of the amount of daylight we have, because of the time of year, that some people are going to have these clinical experiences of depression and anxiety, and they're going to be heightened. So if we can acknowledge that it's a real thing and not try to push it away and try to engage and deal with it in the moment, I think those are the things that can really help us manage those seasonal clinical mental health issues that may show up for us at this time of year.
And so you mentioned being present, and I think some have mentioned before that depression is living in the past, while being anxious is living in the future. So what would be some tips for being present and not either living in the past or the future?
So I think, one of the ways that we can deal with staying in the present, one of the ones that I love that's portable, anybody can use, you don't have to have a particular affiliation, is mindfulness. And mindfulness is purely the act of being present in the moment. So what does that look like? Sometimes it can look like an exercise that I talk about on my social media a lot is finding 5 things related to each of your senses, and then thinking about for each of those things, what's something you're grateful for? What can you see right now where you're sitting that you're grateful for, you're able to see? What can you taste right now? Do you have a cup of water beside you or a hot cocoa that you can taste that you're grateful for? What can you hear? You have the gift of hearing if you're, so able. What can you be grateful for that you can hear in the moment? The trees rustling or the wind blowing, or maybe you're lucky enough to be by a beach, one of my favorite things to do, and you can hear the waves crashing. So finding a way to bring yourself right into the moment. Sometimes it's deep breathing and sitting quietly and just counting so that your mind doesn't wander. Those are some of the strategies I would say. So that mindfulness, that meditation, it might even be something like exercising, paying attention to you're riding your bike, or paying attention to as you're walking, what do you see? Or paying attention as you're petting I have a puppy, petting your puppy. Those are all ways to bring yourself right back into the moment. And I think the more you can do that, it can really help you to avoid or at least subvert some of those anxious and depressive feelings.
And so any last thoughts?
What I want to share with people is something that I always share, and is that I want people to know that whatever their situation is, wherever they are in their station in life in the moment, that there are people out here who care, that if we can find a way to reach out and be connected to a trusted person, that can really help us work through some of the challenges that are unique to this season and this time of year, and that I hope they will do that.
Dr. Alfie, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now before we end, a cat with 4 ears has taken the internet by storm. Meet Midas, a 4-month-old kitten with 2 sets of ears and a defective jaw. That's due to a genetic mutation. But her vet says the additional ears do not affect her health or hearing in general. What makes her special from other cats with similar genetic abnormalities is that all 4 of the ear laps are connected to the ear canal. This also doesn't stop Midas from being an internet sensation with over 70,000 followers. Her owners say they fell in love with her at first sight and decided to take her in, believing her chances of adoption are lower due to her unique condition. Midas is currently living with 2 golden retrievers, Susie and Zeno. Her name comes from the mythological king of Phrygia, who was cursed with donkey ears. Well, what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning into Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.